When I bought my house in Willow Creek Estates, I thought I had found peace. The streets were quiet, the lawns flawless, and the neighborhood brochure promised a community of order and harmony. What it didn't mention was the HOA president, the woman who would soon make my life miserable. Her name was Karen. Everyone knew her, and most feared her. She was impossible to miss. The sharp blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard clutched like a weapon. She prowled the sidewalks daily, eyes scanning for any violation of the HOA bylaws. If your grass grew half an inch too tall, she knew. If your holiday light stayed up one day past regulation, she left a notice. And if you dared question her authority, the whispers said she would bury you in fines. At first, I dismissed the stories. Surely, no one could be that petty. But I learned the truth during my second week in the neighborhood. Trash day fell on a Tuesday. The garbage truck came early, but I left the bin at the curb until evening, intending to roll it in when I got home from work. By the time I returned, the can wasn't waiting neatly by the curb. It was lying on its side in the middle of my driveway, lid gaping, contents spilling out. A folded slip of paper was tucked beneath it. HOA violation. Trash receptacle left in view past allowed hours. Next offense will result in fine. Karen, HOA president. I sighed, cleaned the mess, and assumed it was a misunderstanding. But the following week, the same thing happened. And again the week after that. Always the same scene. My trash can knocked over, another violation slip tucked beneath it. One evening, I caught her in the act. From my upstairs window, I watched her march across my driveway with theatrical precision. She gripped the can, tipped it onto its side, and slid the folded notice beneath it before strutting back to her house across the cul-de-sac. The sight made my blood boil. It wasn't about the trash, it was about control. She wanted me humiliated, kneeling in my driveway every week, cleaning up a mess she created. I decided to confront her, carefully. The next Saturday, I caught her by the mailboxes. "Hey, Karen," I began, keeping my voice even. "I've noticed my trash keeps ending up on its side. Can we clarify the rule about when it needs to be pulled in?" Her lips tightened into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "It's in the handbook," she said crisply. "Trash receptacles must not be visible from the street past noon on collection days. Rules are rules." "Right," I said, "but I work during the day. Sometimes I can't bring it in until evening." She cut me off with a wave of her clipboard. "It's not my problem if you can't manage your household. Maybe this neighborhood isn't the right fit for you." And just like that, she turned and walked away, heels clicking against the pavement like a judge's gavel. That was when I realized Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was weaponizing them. My trash can had become her chosen battlefield. For weeks, I endured her routine. Each Tuesday evening, I returned home to find my can knocked over, sometimes dented, with yet another violation slip tucked neatly inside. It was a ritual of humiliation, one that neighbors noticed but never challenged. They peeked from behind curtains, whispered warnings, but no one dared interfere. At night, lying awake, I ran through possibilities. I could record her with a camera, but she controlled the board. Even caught red-handed, she'd twist it as enforcement. I could try weighing the can down, but she'd only escalate. The truth was clear. Karen had chosen me as her latest target, and she had no intention of letting go. But as I stood in my driveway one Tuesday evening, staring at my overturned bin and the crisp slip of paper tucked inside, a different thought crept in. What if I didn't play her game anymore? What if, instead of enduring her little displays of power, I turned the tables? For the first time since moving into Willow Creek, I felt something other than frustration. I felt resolve. Karen thought she controlled the rules, the board, the neighborhood itself. But she hadn't accounted for one thing: someone willing to fight back. And if she insisted on making Trash Day a war, then I was ready to fight it on my terms. Karen's harassment didn't fade, it intensified. Each Tuesday felt like a performance staged for the whole neighborhood, with me cast as the unwilling fool. I would return home from work to the sight of my trash quintupled, contents scattered just enough to create a nuisance, another violation slip tucked with clinical neatness beneath the lid. At first, I tried to outmaneuver her. I came home during lunch breaks to roll the bin in early, denying her the opportunity. Once, I even asked a coworker to swing by and drag it inside for me. Those small victories felt good, but brief. The moment I slipped, Karen pounced. She never missed a chance to remind me who controlled the narrative. One Tuesday evening, the farce reached new heights. I turned onto my street to find my trash can not only tipped over, but dragged halfway down the road. The lid was cracked, the wheels scraped, and greasy garbage streaked across the pavement like an accusation. Inside, buried beneath crumpled takeout containers, was another slip. Final warning before fines are imposed. Karen. The words were absurd. She had issued final warnings twice already, but her intent was obvious. She wasn't interested in compliance. She wanted dominance. That night, standing in my garage, I stared at the cracked lid of my bin and realized this was no longer about trash. This was about humiliation. She wanted me subservient, bending to her rules, accepting her little displays of authority. And as long as I played by her script, she would win. I began thinking differently. My first thought was evidence. If I mounted a camera and captured her in the act, maybe the HOA board would finally see her abuse of power. But then reality cut through the hope. Karen was the board. She chaired the meetings, steered the votes, and twisted the rules to her liking. Even caught red-handed, she'd spin the footage into proper enforcement. Next, I considered brute force. Weigh the can down with bricks, make it impossible to topple. But that wasn't victory, that was retreat. And I wasn't interested in retreat anymore. Karen had chosen the battleground. But what if I changed the terms of the fight? Late one evening, while scrolling through forums on neighborhood disputes, I stumbled on a post about raccoon-proof trash cans. A homeowner had rigged up a spring-loaded latch to keep animals from prying open the lid. Harmless, clever, effective. The idea stuck in my mind like a spark waiting for fuel. I wasn't interested in keeping animals out. I was interested in teaching a person a lesson. What if my bin could defend itself? Not with harm, not with danger, but with surprise. Something that would turn Karen's ritual of humiliation into her own undoing. The more I thought about it, the more the frustration in my chest began to shift into something else. Anticipation. The following weekend, I gathered supplies in secret. Springs, a latch, a simple trigger mechanism. I tested configurations in my garage, each adjustment bringing me closer to the vision forming in my mind. When I finally installed the device inside the trash can lid, I stood back and admired my work. It was subtle, nearly invisible to the untrained eye. Karen prided herself on spotting violations. But she wasn't going to spot this. In the meantime, her behavior continued. One morning, I left the house early and caught her mid-act. She approached the bin like an actress hitting her cue, glanced up and down the street to make sure she had an audience, and shoved it over with theatrical flair. I watched from a distance as Mr. Peterson, 2 houses down, shook his head from his porch. No one confronted her. Fear still held their tongues. But not mine. Not anymore. That evening, as I reset the can and tucked her latest slip into the growing stack, I felt no anger. Only a steady, focused resolve. Karen had turned trash day into a stage where she alone dictated the story. Next Tuesday, that stage would be hers again, but the script would be mine. For the first time in months, I looked forward to garbage day. Tuesday arrived with deceptive calm. The garbage truck rumbled through at dawn, leaving behind the familiar row of bins along the curb. To anyone passing by, mine looked ordinary, scuffed, cracked lid. Nothing unusual. But inside, hidden beneath the rim, my small mechanism waited, a spring-loaded latch paired with a harmless canister designed to release a puff of foul-smelling smoke when disturbed. I had set it with care. Too obvious, and Karen might hesitate. Too subtle, and it might fail. It had to work the first time, perfectly. I went about my morning with forced normalcy, but my mind kept drifting back to the can. Every minute felt taut, stretched by expectation. By mid-morning, I couldn't resist. I slipped upstairs, drew back the curtain, and aimed my discreet camera across the street. At 10:07 a.m., she appeared. Karen's stride was brisk, confident, the clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of office. She paused at a neighbor's hedge, scribbled a note, then advanced toward my driveway. Even from a distance, I recognized the familiar gleam in her eyes, anticipation. She reached my trash can, crouched slightly, and with the self-assurance of someone who believed herself untouchable, tugged at the lid. The latch snapped. The puff hissed. And then chaos. Karen staggered backward as a cloud of sulfurous smoke enveloped her face. She coughed violently, waving her hands in panic. The clipboard clattered to the pavement, papers scattering in the breeze. The smell clung instantly, sour and unmistakable, wrapping around her neat cardigan and carefully pressed pants like an invisible stain. I nearly laughed aloud, but forced myself to stay silent, watching from the window as the spectacle unfolded. Mr. Peterson, sitting on his porch 2 houses down, leaned forward. Mrs. Chun, across the street, peeked through her blinds, eyes wide. Even the teenager on the corner paused his skateboard to stare. For once, all eyes weren't on me cleaning up a mess. They were on Karen, flailing in her own. She shrieked, voice shrill. This is sabotage. This is criminal. She looked around desperately, expecting sympathy, but found only stifled chuckles. The teenager even lifted his phone, recording. Karen's attempt at dignity collapsed as she stomped away, dragging her tainted cardigan and ruined clipboard toward her front door. The smell lingered in the air long after she disappeared inside. I replayed the footage again and again, savoring every frame. The perfect symmetry of her smug approach and her frantic retreat. The neighborhood, silent for so long, now whispered with amusement. For the first time, Karen wasn't feared, she was laughed at. The following week, she tried again. Cautious this time, she prodded the lid with the tip of her pen before lifting it. Once more, the latch snapped and the smoke hissed. Once more, she gagged and stumbled, shouting for order in a street that no longer obeyed. By the 3rd week, she stopped approaching altogether. She lingered at the sidewalk, glaring at the can like it mocked her. Then, red-faced, she turned and walked away. The ritual had reversed. My trash can stood untouched, proud, while Karen retreated in defeat. And people noticed. The neighborhood began to shift. Mr. Peterson gave me a knowing nod as I rolled my bin back in one evening. Mrs. Chen offered me a smile that spoke volumes. Even the teenager shouted across the street, "That was epic." The spell of fear Karen had woven was unraveling. Her authority, once unquestioned, now looked fragile, ridiculous. The woman who had built her power on intimidation was stumbling under the weight of ridicule. But victory didn't mean the war was finished. Karen still had her clipboard. She still had her gavel, her seat at the head of the HOA. And humiliation, I knew, would not make her gentle. It would make her desperate. Sure enough, new violation slips appeared in my mailbox. Complaints about curtain colors, hose placement, even improper symmetry in my flower bed. Petty, relentless, but transparent. She wasn't enforcing rules anymore. She was lashing out. And the neighborhood saw it. The laughter that had greeted her tantrum now grew into murmurs of dissent. People rolled their eyes, whispered, questioned aloud why so much energy was spent on nonsense. The authority Karen had once wielded like a weapon was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. I had struck back, and I had won the first round. But as I tucked her latest slip onto the growing pile in my drawer, I felt certain of one thing. The real fight was still coming. The air in the neighborhood had shifted. Where once Karen's voice carried like a command, now it lingered like an annoyance, shrill, brittle, easily ignored. Yet her persistence was unshaken. Each week brought new violation slips, tucked into my mailbox like a ritual. Grass exceeds uniform length. Curtain color disruptive. Mailbox in need of repainting. It was laughable, but I didn't laugh. Not openly. Because I knew people like Karen didn't fade quietly. They clawed. They schemed. And when their authority crumbled, they tried to rebuild it with twice the desperation. Her undoing came sooner than I expected. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the houses, the HOA called a meeting. Normally, attendance was sparse, 5 or 6 neighbors enduring Karen's lectures out of obligation. But this time the room was full. Whispers had spread since her trash can fiasco. Phones had circulated videos. Curiosity, mixed with resentment, had drawn the entire cul-de-sac. Karen sat at the front, gavel in hand, clipboard stacked high with notes. She opened with her usual pomp, listing infractions in a monotone of authority. But instead of silence, the room hummed with restless energy. People shifted in their seats. Some rolled their eyes. Others whispered audibly. Then came my turn. Karen cleared her throat, her eyes locking on me like daggers. Once again, we must address Mr. Miller's repeated violations, she announced, waving a sheet of paper as if it were evidence in a trial. Unapproved paint on the back deck. Non-compliant placement of garden fixtures. And, of course, she smiled tightly. Continued improper management of waste containers. Gasps mixed with chuckles. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I rose slowly, letting the pause stretch. Karen, I said evenly, are we really here to discuss my trash cans? Or are we here because you've made it your mission to turn this neighborhood into your personal kingdom? The room stirred. Karen stiffened. This is about order, Mr. Miller. About standards. No. I cut in, voice sharper now. This is about you. About your clipboard, your gavel, your obsession with control. You've harassed me. You've humiliated neighbors over paint colors and mailbox sizes. You've made life here miserable. Karen's mouth opened, but the words faltered. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. With a click, the projector flickered on, spilling light across the wall. And there, for everyone to see, played the footage. Karen approaching my trash can, yanking the lid, and stumbling backward as smoke erupted around her. The recording captured everything, her flailing arms, her shrill shrieks, the laughter in the background. The room erupted. Some laughed openly. Others clapped. Even the usually reserved Mr. Peterson chuckled into his sleeve. Karen's face blanched. She slammed the gavel against the table. This is irrelevant. This is sabotage. He engineered this. Maybe I did, I admitted, letting the words hang. But why did it work? Because you couldn't stop yourself. Because you couldn't resist knocking over someone else's property just to prove you could. And that's the problem, Karen. Not the cans. Not the curtains. You. Silence followed. Heavy, decisive silence. Mrs. Chen raised her hand timidly, then lowered it and simply spoke. We're tired of this. One by one, voices joined. A man near the back. She fined me for my kids' bikes being in the driveway. A woman beside him. She told me my shutters were the wrong shade of green. Another neighbor. She trespassed into my yard to measure my fence. The tide had turned. It wasn't me versus Karen anymore. It was everyone. Karen sputtered, slamming her clipboard shut. You people are ungrateful. Without rules, this neighborhood would fall apart. You need me. But no one agreed. By the end of the meeting, a motion had been raised and seconded, a vote to remove Karen from the HOA board. When the ballots were counted, the result was unanimous. Karen, once queen of the cul-de-sac, sat stunned as the gavel was taken from her hand. She stormed out, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. The door slammed behind her, but the sound carried no weight. That night, as I rolled my trash can back from the curb, the street was alive with something new: laughter, conversation, relief. For the first time in years, people lingered outside, talking freely without fear of being reprimanded. My can stood untouched. My yard, free from slips. Karen's house remained dark, curtains drawn tight. Her reign had ended, not with obedience, but with ridicule. And as I closed my own door, I realized the victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us who had lived under her thumb. One trash can had been enough to topple a tyrant. The clipboard queen had fallen.